The air in the church was heavy, not just with the smell of wilted flowers and burning candles, but with the sadness and tension that hung over us. It was my father's funeral, a man who lived an intense 90 years and left behind a legacy that went far beyond material possessions. He was a beacon of wisdom, the pillar of our family. Beside me, my wife, Clara, held my hand tightly as I looked at the mahogany coffin, feeling his absence as a hole in my chest. At the altar, the priest spoke of my father's kindness and generosity, but I could barely hear his words. My mind was in a whirlwind. The pain of loss was mixed with an anxiety that had been growing in recent days. And the reason for my anxiety was sitting in the front row, my brother Marcos and his wife, the enigmatic and always calculating Bruna. Bruna, a woman of stunning beauty and eyes that seemed to hide a plan with every blink, was never a big fan of our family. She married Marcos 5 years ago, and from the first day I felt an invisible barrier between us. She was the opposite of Clara, who has always been the light of my life. Bruna was shadow, ambition, and secrets. Her relationship with my father was a constant game of chess, full of false compliments and disingenuous favors. And now, during the funeral, I caught her repeatedly looking at her purse, a small leather purse that seemed to be weighing a ton. With every furtive glance, my heart raced. I knew something was wrong. According to my father's last wish, his will would be read at the end of the ceremony, right there in the church, in front of the whole family. It was his request, so that all his loved ones would be present to hear his last words. The lawyer, Dr. Montero, was already sitting in one of the front rows with a black briefcase on his lap. They were my father's last words to all of us, and I felt with all my might that Bruna had something to hide. Her gaze at the purse was intense, and I could see that she was fighting with herself. Part of me wanted to believe that I was exaggerating, that my grief was making me see things. But the other, more rational part knew that Bruna had a plan, and that my father's funeral, a moment of mourning and respect, was just another opportunity for her. I knew the war had been declared, and I knew that my daughter-in-law Bruna had no limits. She tried to hide my father's will, and I had no idea how or why. The priest's sermon finally ended, and the church, which had been in a heavy silence, was filled with anxious murmurs. The moment for the reading of the will had arrived. Dr. Montero, a man with a calm voice and an impeccable appearance, stood up with the black briefcase in his hands. He went to the pulpit, and I, along with my wife Clara, my brother Marcos, and his wife Bruna, sat in the front seats near my father's coffin. Bruna's nervousness was palpable. Her eyes didn't leave the lawyer's briefcase, and I could see that her hands were sweating. My heart was pounding. I knew that Bruna was hiding something, but I couldn't understand why. Dr. Montero then opened the briefcase and took out an envelope. It was the will. He opened the envelope and began to read with a clear and calm voice. I, Joe Mitchell, in full possession of my mental faculties, by means of this will express my last wishes. I leave to my eldest son Paulo and to his wife Clara our beach house. My heart filled with joy. It was our favorite place. But I noticed that Bruna was not reacting. She had an expression of hatred, and I knew that she was not happy. Dr. Montero continued to read. I leave to my daughter-in-law Bruna my collection of rare jewels, including my emerald necklace, which belonged to my mother. My heart filled with suspicion. Bruna, who never cared about the family, was being gifted with something so personal. I looked at her, and I saw the smile of satisfaction on her lips. She had gotten what she wanted. She had humiliated me. She had made a fool of me. Dr. Montero then prepared to read the last part of the will, but Bruna interrupted him. "Dr. Montero, I remember that my father-in-law had 2 wills. The other one, which is the real one, is in my purse." The lawyer stared at her, and his voice, which was once calm, became one of surprise. "Bruna, I don't know what you're talking about. I only have 1 will. This is the only document that your father-in-law gave me." Bruna laughed, a dry and cruel sound. "My father-in-law was a man of secrets, Dr. Montero, and he gave me a will that he didn't want anyone to know about. A will that he wanted me to hide from everyone. A will that would give me his fortune and make me the owner of his empire." I felt paralyzed. My daughter-in-law had the real will, and she was hiding it from all of us. My brother Marcos, who had an expression of surprise and fear, tried to defend her. "Bruna, why are you doing this? You can't do that." But Bruna ignored him. She walked towards the pulpit, and with a smile of victory, she took the will out of her purse. The entire church was silent. We all looked at her, shocked. I knew that Bruna had a plan, and I was ready to fight. I would not let her take my father's fortune. I would not let her destroy my family. I was ready for war, and I knew that my victory was our victory, and I was not going to give up. Bruna's audacity was shocking. She walked with firm steps towards the pulpit, holding what, according to her, was my father's real will. Dr. Montero, visibly pale, tried to intervene. "Bruna, don't do that. It's a lack of respect for your father-in-law's memory and for the family. If there is another will, it must be legally validated." But Bruna ignored him, as if he were an insignificant obstacle in her way. She turned to the congregation with a smile of superiority and began to read. "I, João Mitchell, in full possession of my mental faculties, by means of this document express my last wishes," she began. Her voice was clear and loud, echoing through the church. "I leave to my daughter-in-law, Bruna, all my fortune and my businesses so that she can use them for the good of the family." I felt paralyzed. Bruna was reading a fake will, and she knew it. I looked at my brother Marcos, and he had an expression of shock and fear. He didn't know what to do. He was torn between his wife and his family. But Bruna didn't stop there. She continued to read, and every word was a stab. "I leave to my son Paulo my collection of antique cars so that he can sell them and use the money to help his wife, Clara, to pay off her debts." My heart filled with rage. Bruna was publicly humiliating me. She was exposing our finances, our fragility. She was telling everyone that I was a weak man who needed my father's help to take care of my wife. Dr. Montero, who was standing next to the pulpit, trying in vain to intervene, finally took a stand. "Bruna, stop. You're exposing your father-in-law's and your brother-in-law's private lives. This is illegal and immoral. The will you're reading is fake. I have the real will, and the real will be read to everyone, here, now." But Bruna ignored him. She continued to read, and her words were like a poison that spread through the church. She had destroyed my father's funeral. She had humiliated me. She had destroyed my father's memory, and she didn't care. I stood up, and I walked towards her. My voice was trembling, but I couldn't give up. "Bruna, stop lying. You're reading a fake will. My father would never do that. He would never humiliate me. He would never destroy my family." But Bruna laughed, a dry and cruel sound. "The truth hurts, doesn't it, Paulo? But it's the truth. Your weakness is your greatest weakness." She had defeated me. She had won. She had taken the fake will, and now she had the real one, and she was preparing to destroy it.
I knew that my daughter-in-law was a woman without limits, and I knew that I had to fight. I couldn't give up. The church was in an uproar. What began as a solemn ceremony turned into a depressing spectacle of ambition and betrayal. Bruna, with the will that she claimed was the real one, tried to rip it up, but her hands were trembling, and she couldn't. I ran towards her, but my brother Marcos stopped me.
"Stay out of this, Paulo. This is our life. You've always had everything, and now you want to steal our happiness too." I looked at Marcos with a broken heart. He didn't know me. He didn't know that I didn't want my father's money. I just wanted my father to have a dignified funeral, a funeral he deserved. "Marcos, don't you see? Your wife is using you. She doesn't care about you. She only cares about the money." But Marcos didn't listen to me. He was blinded by the desire to have what he thought he deserved. He was blinded by his wife's ambition. I felt defeated. Bruna, in a moment of desperation, managed to rip up the will, and I felt empty. My father's memory, his legacy, had been destroyed by my daughter-in-law's ambition. I turned around and I saw Dr. Montero with his calm and serene voice breaking the silence. "Bruna, I'm very sorry, but you don't have the right to do that. The will you're reading is fake, and the real one is in my bag, and I, as your father-in-law's lawyer, Mr. Joao, read it, and the last part says that he leaves his fortune to charity. He leaves his empire to help needy children. He leaves his house, his fortune, to the community. He leaves his collection of antique cars to his son Paulo, and his beach house to his son Marcos, and to his wife Bruna, so that they can have a place to live." I felt shocked. My father was a man who had surprised me again. He wasn't a man of money, he was a man of heart. He knew that my daughter-in-law was an ambitious woman, and he had disarmed her. He had exposed her in front of everyone. Bruna, who had an expression of surprise and fear, turned to me. She was ashamed. She had been publicly humiliated. My brother Marcos, who was in shock, approached me. "I'm sorry, Paulo, I'm an idiot. I didn't know." I hugged him, and I felt happy. I hadn't lost my family. I had won. My daughter-in-law had tried to destroy my father, but she had only made him a hero. And I, who thought I had lost, had won. The silence that settled in the church was deafening. Bruna, with the fake will in pieces in her hands, seemed to have lost all her composure and arrogance. Her skin, once impeccable, was pale and stained with tears of rage. She had tried to humiliate me, but my father had humiliated her in a way that I never could. He had disarmed her with her own ambition, using her desire to have everything to unmask her. I approached Dr. Montero, who had an expression of triumph on his face. "Dr. Montero, thank you. I don't know how to thank you." He smiled at me and said, "Your father was a very wise man, Paulo. He knew that Bruna's ambition was her weakness. He knew that she would try to hide the real will to take his fortune. That's why he gave me a copy. He wanted me to unmask her in front of everyone." I felt shocked. My father had planned everything. He had used Bruna's ambition against herself. Marcos, who was in shock, approached me, and his voice was filled with sadness. "Paulo, I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. I didn't know she was like that. I don't know what to do." I hugged him, and I forgave him. I knew he wasn't a bad man. He was a man who had been manipulated by a woman he loved. Bruna, who was paralyzed in the middle of the church, was confronted by a woman who was sitting in the first row, who stood up, and her voice was filled with rage. "Bruna, I can't believe you did that. My daughter, who is your daughter, always told me that you were an ambitious person, but I never thought you were a person without a heart." Bruna, who was in shock, turned to the woman, and her voice was filled with fear. "Mum, what are you doing here? You can't do that." The woman, who was Bruna's mother, approached her, and her voice was filled with sadness. "Bruna, you always told me that your ambition was your greatest strength, but your ambition blinded you. You became a person I don't know. You became a person I don't love." Bruna, who was in shock, turned to my father. She knelt in front of the coffin, and her voice was filled with regret. "Dad, I'm sorry, I'm a monster. I'm not a person who deserves your fortune." I felt shocked. Bruna was in shock. She had been unmasked, humiliated, and she had lost everything. My father, who was dead, had won his greatest battle, and he had given me the most valuable gift. He had given me my family back. Bruna's mother, with a voice full of disappointment, didn't stop. "Bruna, I didn't raise you to be like that. I gave you everything I could, but I never taught you to be a person who steals other people's happiness." Bruna, who was in shock, couldn't defend herself. She was paralyzed. The woman, Bruna's mother, then turned to me, and her voice, which was once full of rage, was now full of regret. "Paulo, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. My daughter became a monster, and it's my fault. I never taught her to value the things that really matter." I looked at her, and I felt bad for her. She was a woman who had been betrayed by her own daughter. I approached her and said, "Mom, it's not your fault. You did what you could. You loved her, and love is the only thing that matters." Bruna's mother, who had an expression of surprise, hugged me and said, "Thank you, Paulo, thank you for forgiving me." I forgave her. I wasn't a person who held grudges. I was a person who forgave. Bruna, who was in shock, approached me, and her voice was filled with sadness. "Paulo, I'm so sorry. I'm a monster. I'm not a person who deserves your family."
I don't know what to do. I lost everything. I looked at her, and I saw the pain in her eyes. She wasn't a bad woman. She was a woman who had been blinded by ambition. She was a woman who had lost everything. I approached Bruna and hugged her. "Bruna, I forgive you. I forgive you for humiliating me, for betraying me, for making me suffer. I forgive you because I know that love is the only thing that matters." Bruna, who was in shock, hugged me back, and she cried.
She cried not for me, but for herself. She cried because she had realized that her ambition was her greatest weakness. She cried because she had lost everything. After that, my brother Marcos approached me and said, "Thank you, Paulo. I don't know how to thank you." I hugged him and I said, "I forgive you. I forgive you because I know that love is the only thing that matters." My father had taught me to forgive. He taught me that happiness is not in money, but in love. He taught me that family is the most important thing. And I, who thought I had lost, had won. My father had won. And he had given me my family back. The funeral of my father, which should have been a moment of pain and mourning, turned into a stage for redemption. Bruna, who had tried to destroy my father and his memory, was now kneeling in front of the coffin, crying and asking for forgiveness. Her mother, who had been a figure of rage and disappointment, was now a figure of love and compassion. My brother Marcos, who had been blinded by ambition, was now with me, by my side. I felt relieved. My father, who was dead, had given me my family back. He had taught me that family is the most important thing. He had taught me that forgiveness is the only thing that can set you free. I remembered what he had told me once. Ambition can blind you, but love can set you free. I felt moved. My father had taught me to forgive Bruna, to forgive Marcos, to forgive myself. Bruna, who was crying, approached me, and her voice was filled with sadness. "Paulo, I'm so sorry. I'm a monster. I'm not a person who deserves your family. I don't know what to do. I lost everything." I looked at her, and I saw the pain in her eyes. She wasn't a bad woman. She was a woman who had been manipulated by her own ambition. She was a woman who had lost everything. I approached Bruna and hugged her, and I said, "Bruna, you are my family, and family is the only thing that matters. You are not alone. We are with you." Bruna, who was in shock, hugged me back, and she cried. She cried not for me, but for herself. She cried because she had realized that her ambition was her greatest weakness. She cried because she had lost everything, but I forgave her, and my forgiveness set her free. I turned to the church, and my voice was filled with emotion. "Family and friends, I want you to know that my father was a very wise man. He was not a man who cared about money. He cared about love. He cared about family. He cared about forgiveness. And he, in his last will, taught us that happiness is not in money, but in love. And that ambition can blind you, but forgiveness can set you free." I felt moved. I was not just talking to my family, I was talking to everyone who was there. I was talking to Bruna. I turned to Bruna and her mother, and I smiled at them. I forgave them. I forgave them because I knew that love is the only thing that matters. My daughter-in-law, Bruna, had humiliated me, but she taught me that forgiveness is my greatest strength. She taught me that family is the only thing that matters. And she, with her ambition, taught me that happiness is not in money, but in love. And I, who thought I had lost, had won. And my victory was the victory of love and forgiveness.